The cafe went silent in a heartbeat. A sharp, commanding voice cut through the clatter of cups and the low hum of conversation. "You can't sit there." The woman looked up from her laptop, calm, composed, entirely unshaken. The officer stepped closer, towering over the small table where she had been quietly working. "Move," he barked, slamming his hand on the table. Laptops rattled. Napkins fluttered. Other customers froze mid-sip, unsure whether to intervene or disappear into the background. What the officer didn't know, what nobody in that cafe had recognized yet, was that the quiet woman, calmly pushing her coffee aside, was Ronda Rousey. It had begun like any normal day. She had chosen this small, off-the-beaten-path cafe to escape the constant glare of cameras and crowds. Hoodie drawn low, cap shielding her face. No bodyguards. Just a woman trying to enjoy a moment of peace. The officer, however, had come in with authority radiating from every step, scanning the cafe with the assumption that he needed to assert control. And then he landed on her. "You don't belong here," he growled, leaning over the table, voice low but aggressive. Rhonda's eyes lifted slowly. Calm, controlled, no hint of fear. "I haven't done anything wrong," she said softly. The officer scoffed, mistaking calm for defiance. "You don't get to talk back to me," he snapped. And in a flash, he grabbed her identification, shoving it roughly toward himself as if to assert dominance. The room tightened. Conversations paused midword. Chairs scraped against the floor. Some patrons instinctively reached for their phones. Rhonda didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't rise. She simply adjusted her laptop, her posture perfectly straight, her eyes locked on his. She didn't need to move to command attention. She didn't need to raise her voice to demand respect. Her presence alone was enough. The officer's face twisted with frustration. "This isn't how this works," he growled, leaning over the table, voice low but aggressive. Rhonda's eyes lifted slowly. Calm, controlled, no hint of fear. "I haven't done anything wrong," she said softly. The officer scoffed, mistaking calm for defiance. "You don't get to talk back to me," he snapped. And in a flash, he grabbed her identification, shoving it roughly toward himself as if to assert dominance. The room tightened. Conversations paused midword. Chairs scraped against the floor. Some patrons instinctively reached for their phones. Rhonda didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't rise. She simply adjusted her laptop, her posture perfectly straight, her eyes locked on his. She didn't need to move to command attention. She didn't need to raise her voice to demand respect. Her presence alone was enough. The officer's face twisted with frustration. "This isn't how this works," he barked, knocking over her cup in a thoughtless gesture. Coffee spilled across the table, hot and fast, dripping toward her notebook. The tension in the room skyrocketed. Every patron held their breath. And then, someone whispered, "Wait, isn't that Ronda Rousey?" Head swiveled. Phones lifted. Eyes widened. The officer didn't notice yet. He still stood there, full of bluster, full of misplaced authority. But the quiet woman before him was one of the most formidable athletes in the world. Ronda finally stood, calm, but fully aware of the room's energy shifting. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't yell. She didn't move aggressively. She simply met his eyes. And the room felt the change. The officer, sensing the weight of that gaze, froze mid-step. Recognition, slow, dawning, almost painful, crossed his features. You're Ronda Rousey," he stammered. She nodded once. "Yes, and you should know better." The cafe erupted into whispers, camera flashes, and astonished murmurs. Some customers couldn't believe what they were seeing. Some reached for their phones. Some just stared, mouths open. Rhonda's composure was unnerving. Her calm made the officer's aggression look small, childish, and utterly misplaced. She didn't escalate. She didn't humiliate. She simply let the moment speak for itself. A single, quiet statement of authority. Presence outweighs power. "You treat people differently based on who they are?" she asked quietly. "That ends here." The officer stammered, unable to muster an answer. The room's tension lingered. Everyone knew they were witnessing a lesson far bigger than a cafe confrontation. The confrontation had frozen the cafe in time. But the ripples didn't end there. The barista, still holding a rag, shifted nervously, unsure whether to speak. Other patrons had phones raised, cameras rolling, whispering among themselves. Some were in awe. Some were terrified of what might come next. The officer, however, was stuck in a moment of disbelief. He had assumed authority would bend the situation to him. That intimidation always works. He hadn't prepared for quiet power. Ronda didn't move. She didn't glare. She didn't yell. She simply scanned the room slowly, letting every eye meet hers for a fraction longer than comfortable. It was deliberate, controlled, and in that brief, tense pause, everyone realized she could dismantle the situation without ever raising a hand. The officer's chest tightened. The words he wanted to say froze in his throat. A woman, calm and composed, had stripped his performance of power in one quiet motion. Then the subtle things began to happen. A young man at the next table leaned forward. "Sir, maybe you should," he murmured, trailing off. The officer snapped his gaze at him, but the strength in Ronda's presence stopped the words from being anything more than a whisper. Even the regulars, people who had seen aggressive officers in cafes before, were silent, unsure whether to intervene or step back. Because nobody had ever seen a quiet confrontation like this, and the tension was palpable. Ronda bent slightly, collecting her spilled coffee cup and wiping the table. Each movement precise, each gesture careful, nothing wasted, nothing dramatic. And yet every motion carried weight. The officer finally spoke, his voice shaking slightly. You should have identified yourself." Ronda's lips curved just slightly. "I did," she said calmly. "You just weren't listening." The cafe seemed to exhale all at once. Phones lowered, but cameras still pointed. Everyone in the room realized they had witnessed something unusual. It wasn't the slap. It wasn't the coffee spilling. It wasn't even the officer's anger. It was the way Ronda had claimed authority without claiming aggression. People started murmuring. Whispers spread like wildfire. "That's Ronda Rousey. No way. Did you see that calm?" Even the officer's colleagues, who had been present, didn't know where to look. He had entered expecting compliance. He had walked out seeing composure as power, a lesson delivered without violence, without spectacle, but undeniably. Ronda stood and collected her bag. The officer froze mid-step. For the first time in his life, he realized that intimidation has limits. That authority is meaningless without respect. That aggression can evaporate in the face of presence. Once outside, the murmurs of the cafe still echoed through the open doors. Social media lit up within minutes. A few patrons had already uploaded clips. Headlines started forming. "Quiet woman shuts down aggressive officer. Crowd in shock. Ronda Rousey proves calm beats aggression. Police confrontation goes viral. But the woman wins without a fight." Meanwhile, the officer's internal monologue was chaotic. He replayed the moment over and over. The way she had looked up at him. The quiet correction of spilled coffee. The single line that had punctured his authority. "You just weren't listening." Every instinct he had as an enforcer told him he should have acted differently. But experience, exposure, and now humility told him he had been outmatched, not by violence, but by presence. Back at the cafe, patrons returned to their tables slowly, trying to process the tension that had filled the air moments ago. The whispers didn't stop. Some shook their heads. Some stared silently at the empty table. Some discussed Ronda's career, her accolades, her reputation, but everyone agreed on the same point. They had just witnessed a masterclass in control. In the following days, the video went viral. News outlets debated the incident. Did the officer overstep? Could Ronda have reacted physically? Was this a lesson in public decorum? Social media exploded with admiration. Ronda Rousey doesn't need to fight to win. Calmness is the ultimate power. Every interaction teaches a lesson. Watch and learn. Even young athletes watched it repeatedly, studying her posture, her breathing, her timing. Weeks later, the officer appeared in internal hearings. Colleagues described the incident, using footage from bystanders. He realized, painfully, that this confrontation had changed more than his pride. It had challenged his assumptions about authority, about respect, about control. Meanwhile, Ronda's focus remained on her next match, her next training session. No drama, no headline chasing, just preparation, discipline, and mastery, the same qualities that had neutralized the confrontation weeks ago. But the world remembered the moment, the quiet victory, the demonstration that physical stature or loud authority doesn't equate to dominance. Presence, calm, and unwavering composure do. Months later, young women across the country referenced the incident in interviews and motivational talks. I watched Ronda Rousey handle a confrontation, and it changed the way I carry myself. It wasn't about winning. It was about owning your space. The cafe had become a quiet legend, a reminder that courage isn't always loud. And somewhere, the officer would never forget the lesson. The wrong person to humiliate is always the one who remains calm, the one who refuses to react, the one whose presence alone commands respect. And Ronda? She had won again, not with fists, not with words, but with the undeniable power of composure.